Hey there, I'm Brian Malow, and this is But Seriously. And you already know, I think, that I like birds. Some of you have been following me for a while, and you know about my adventures with the mourning doves that have been setting up home just outside one of my windows on a window air conditioning unit. But I've been fascinated with birds forever. Who hasn't been? And they're dinosaurs. Birds are dinosaurs. So you got two things you love. You love dinosaurs, you love birds, and they're one and the same thing, it turns out. Um, Here in Raleigh, I'm lucky that I feel like compared to when I lived in San Francisco, here in Raleigh, I live really close to downtown, and yet it's there's so much greenery. This is the city of oaks. There's so many trees, there's so many birds and insects, and I wish I could identify all these bird calls, but I can't. And but I get to see so many, and there's one thing I hear. I do hear woodpeckers, and that's not a call, but it's a sound that I didn't recognize as a woodpecker at first. It's very, like so many of the sounds that birds can make, it's sort of mechanical. But this one, it kind of is mechanical. It's the repetitive pounding of its beak against a tree. And I mean, there are so many unusual things about birds, but woodpeckers, it's always like magnets. Like, how do they do it? How do they do that and not come home and, honey, I have a terrible headache. I've been working all day today. Right? What is it? They must have some really interesting biological architecture. So I've wanted to talk to somebody about woodpeckers for a long time, and we don't exactly have a woodpecker specialist on the show, but we do have an avian ecologist. Let's bring her on right now. Lauren Pharr, thanks for being here, Lauren.
It's so nice to be here, Brian. Thank you for having me.
And you are an avian ecologist, which
I
must
am.
mean you know something about birds because you're not a bird. So in that sense, you're not an avian ecologist in that you are a bird. So you must know something about them. But I know you're not really an ornithologist, you're an ecologist. But it
Mhm.
just so happens that you're working on your PhD at NC
It
State,
just so happens.
and woodpeckers are involved.
Woodpeckers
So,
are involved, yes.
so I don't know where to start, but let's put you on the screen and let people see your
Oh,
name there.
goodness. Oh, goodness.
I'll just put you on this. I'm not even gonna ask you a question. I'll just put you on screen and go ahead, speak.
Love it. Love it.
No,
Love it.
we'll come back to that. But where to start? So I already mentioned in promoting the show that we'd be
Yeah.
talking about conservation and that we would be talking about prescribed burns because, ladies and gentlemen, Lauren is licensed to go into a forest and start a fire. The rest of us would get into really bad trouble for that. But Lauren, apparently you have 007 license to burn. You can just walk into a forest and start a fire. Am I perhaps simplifying things?
Hey, well, for the most part, I will say that before you go into a forest and start a fire, you do have to follow all of these. You do have to take these necessary steps, so to speak,
Yeah.
before you begin to, just light the forest on fire.
Yeah.
And
Well,
there's many things, you have to take into consideration the weather. So that'd be, your wind speed and humidity. All of that has to be taken into account
oh
before you
yeah,
start a fire,
sure.
because that
Because
will actually let you know if you're what we call in or out of prescription of prescribed burning, basically. So whether you can
okay.
burn or not depends on those
Because when
factors.
you start a fire, you're not really going for you're not aiming to start a big fire. Like if I start a fire, I don't have to worry about the wind conditions or anything because hey, the wilder the
Right.
better. But that's a joke. I don't need the Department of Agriculture or Bureau of Land Management coming down on me. Um, I told you that there's a certain looseness here. I may have to stop and I have a cat now that I've adopted that is very much an indoor-outdoor cat. Just if now you as a bird lover and an ecologist, you might have a problem with that, and maybe we could start with that topic. But let me just say in advance that this cat was 100% an outdoor cat. So
Okay.
anytime I'm keeping him inside is actually a win. But he
Okay.
is
Right.
somewhat
Right.
feral, and I'm hoping over time he'll spend more and more time indoors and just give up on that. But for right now, he gets real antsy and he lets and by antsy I mean claws and running around and claws on everything. And so how about, do you know much about that topic? How bad are
Oh goodness. Well,
cats
it
for the
well, for one thing, do not get an urban ecologist started on on outdoor cats. Um, so that yeah, so I mean, outdoor cats are one of the
oops, that's
leading
you're not Brian Malow.
good. I guess today I am, huh? But yeah, outdoor cats are one of the leading causes of bird mortalities. So
Right up there with
I
flying into windows probably.
yeah,
We aren't really good for we're not really good for birds with light pollution.
no,
Oh, did we, was that a topic that I didn't put it on our list, but light pollution. I realized all of a
yeah,
sudden here we stumbled into some new bird topics that we didn't even discuss in advance.
yes,
But
yes.
yeah, I mean, I don't know if every cat, I have an ecologist friend who expressed some skepticism about some of that research because there's the
Really?
issue of I'm not sure where he stands on it now, but there's that issue of like a sample size. And really are, because every cat out there isn't taking down birds, but I do know that my
That's a good
neighbor
point.
took in a cat, and that cat brings them something almost every day that they don't want brought to them. So
So there are those cats.
there are those cats, and this one, it's hard to say. I've never seen him catch anything,
Yeah.
but I know he's interested.
Well, keep your eye on them.
I will. So that's
Keep
a
your
big
eye on them.
cause. And so what is an avian ecologist?
Oh goodness. Well, I mean, so one thing, so avian ecologists, a thing that they really specialize in is really, I mean, the ecology of birds. So basically how birds are interacting with their environment, and everything from their survival to reproduction, just learning more about, a specific bird's ecology, and then therefore how it uses those specific traits in its ecology, so to speak, to survive in its environment. That's sort of what that gets into. So it's a
Yeah.
broad name, and then you get more specified, but for the most part, that's sort of what an avian ecologist is. We like to understand what birds are using or how they're interacting with their environments that they're in, so to speak.
And without going deeply into it yet, what's the nature of your research and and your thesis?
Yeah. So currently, I am working with a federally endangered species. So I work with the federally endangered Redcucated woodpecker. And specifically, what I'm looking at, so I focus on climate change impacts, specifically their impacts on avian behavioral responses. So going back to what I explained earlier, so how birds are interacting with their environment, but in this case, how birds are interacting with their environment in response to climate change, because most people are aware that climate change is a thing. Climate change is happening. So, for us to sort of put in this time and effort to research this topic, on our, animal species, on all the species here in the world, animals, plants, etc., that's sort of, that's some important research that we want to consider and take into account.
Yeah. Do you know
Yeah.
I how if someone asks you how do you know by like the creatures you study, how do you know climate change is happening? Do you
Yeah.
have some interesting concrete evidence?
Yeah. Well, so concrete evidence. Well, for one, uh, there's a ton of species of birds who are nesting earlier. And so, what that's essentially telling us is that, in response to sort of, climate change in general and these changing temperatures, birds are sort of, they're migrating earlier and they're nesting earlier, which therefore leads into leads into a fact about, things such as food resources. So uh birds, heavily rely on insects for one, as a main source of their diet, and climate change is also impacting insects. So with that, we sort of see that with climate change impacting insects, and with birds sort of, migrating and laying their eggs earlier, making their nests earlier, breeding earlier, they may come at a time where insects may not be, so abundant, so to speak, because it's not really time for those certain insects to, or a lot of those insects to sort of, be around. But just in general, different impacts, related to climate change can impact insect populations, as well. So
Right, okay,
that's
yeah,
one
that's
reason.
a completely, that's even a different topic, like just the amount of insects that might be around. But I like
Yes.
that first one you said. We didn't discuss this before, but that was kind of what I was hoping you would mention because because the world is so interconnected.
It is.
And we're in a situation here that took millions of years to gradually evolve to this balance. And so there's so much this timing. And so this idea that
Yes.
if the weather changes a little and birds start showing up
Hmm.
early and their
Hmm.
food source isn't responding the same way yet and isn't there, then
Right.
they show up. That ties into this other thing, which is just instinct and migration,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is so bizarre and hard to comprehend, but it
Yeah.
happens.
It
They
happens.
but they're used to arriving and their food being ready or coming to the table
Right.
soon.
Right.
Um, and instead they show up and go, "I'm sorry, we said we were going to be
I'm
here in
sorry.
March or April. Where we called ahead, and yet
Yes.
where's our food?"
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I think sometimes that that humans are the ones with these big brains, and we think we're the smartest thing on the planet, and yet we're like the last ones to respond to climate change because
Yes.
other creatures are changing altitudes and changing latitudes, and they
And here we
are.
are.
Yes, and here we are. Is it even happening? The others are acting on it.
Yeah.
And so for you,
Yeah.
I think it must be very frustrating because you have people that are going, question. Some people seem to think that scientists are trying to figure out whether climate change is happening, whereas scientists are documenting the changes that have been happening.
Exactly. 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 There you go. And then, and getting back to humans, like what you had mentioned about, we think we're so smart, but honestly, gosh, not as much as we think. But getting back to humans and climate change, so we get into this topic, these anthropogenic changes. So like the Anthropocene, so to speak, that's a sort of, a new era that we've sort of named now, the Anthropocene. And so within that, we have factors that we're actually causing as humans. So if we look specifically in, urban areas, urban settings, we have things like noise pollution, we have light pollution, like all of that stuff we are contributing to in some way, which is, therefore impacting our animal species who, call these urban areas home. So that's one example, going back to your point about, we think we're so smart, but here
Yeah.
we are sort of
What about
contributing to the
light
problem.
pollution? Yeah, we totally are contributing to the problem. And
Totally.
we are the problem, some might
We
say.
are the problem.
Um, we're great too. Pat us on the back.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
just like, but if we're being honest,
Yeah.
what about light pollution? How is that a problem for birds?
Yeah, for sure. Well, for one thing, when birds migrate, they use what we call migratory cues. So they may use special landmarks, like here, on land. They may use landmarks like in the sky. Like when they're in the sky, they use things to help them navigate. So light pollution is really contributing to this thing that we call sky glow. So things that could be contributing, they can come from, so light pollution sources, for example, illuminated billboards at light, illuminated
Mm.
buildings that stay on, all night long, lampposts, and so therefore those sorts of sources are really contributing to that, to this light pollution that is therefore impacting birds, and it's impacting them in a way that's making it hard for them to fly and navigate and sort of basically see things that they need to see, all because of that of light pollution. It's, gosh, it's
Right.
something.
I don't know, and I know this is probably a little outside your field, but if
Yeah.
light pollution is kind of the explanation for why moths are always flying into light bulbs. I think I picked up somewhere that I think they're headed towards the moon. They don't expect that it's this bright light, but they don't
Yes.
expect it to be right
Well,
there. But
I have an entomologist on my PhD committee, so I will definitely ask him that question. He might have some great insights on
that's a
that.
question I'd love the answer to. What is going on there? Why are they
Yes.
doing that? Do we understand
Why do
why
they
they're
do
doing
this?
that? And is that what it is? It's like it's
Yes.
definitely attracting them, but
Yes.
why?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
birds. So I showed you. We got a little comment. Let me say hi to Fred. Fred, thanks for tuning in. Thermal islands. That's
Mhm.
like urban thermal islands. Is
Yeah.
that an issue?
Yeah.
Heat?
Thermal heat islands. Yep. Yep.
How
Yep.
does that
Huge
how does
issue.
that cause oh, it just heats up more than the
Really? Yeah. So
nature that
yeah, I would say so. Something like that. Heats up.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um so before we get into the woodpecker and your research,
Yeah.
let me just get a little background on you. Did you always know you
Yeah.
wanted to be a scientist and in the biological fields or
Oh
where are you
goodness.
from?
So I'm originally from North Carolina, born and raised. I am from a small town called Waxhaw, North Carolina. I tell people that and they look at me sideways, like, where in the world is that?
Yeah.
So what I usually follow up with that is, well, it's right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. And then people
Okay.
sort of get a sense and they're like, oh, okay, well, I totally know Charlotte. So this is this is
Yeah.
where that area is. But I mean, in a nutshell, because I could go on forever about my story and how I came into this field.
And that
Originally,
is
I
why you're
really,
here. That is why
yeah,
you're here to tell me your
that is
story.
why I'm here. Exactly,
You
exactly.
can
So,
go on. Please do.
well,
If I
gosh,
could
I don't
shut
want
up
to take
for a
up too
minute,
much time because it'll take me ages to tell this story. But
especially with me interrupting you every second.
no, you're totally fine. You're totally fine.
You
So
have to say
originally,
that.
originally growing up, I always wanted to be a veterinarian because I
Yeah.
absolutely loved animals. So, and I have been exposed, believe it or not, I have been exposed to wildlife. So my dad is a hunter, and I've also been exposed to birds earlier on in my life. So my uncle was, your avid backyard birder. So we would call each other on the phone every day and just discuss what birds we were all seeing in our backyards. But it wouldn't be until later on that I sort of I came to realize, like, I would come to realize that, well, wildlife and birds, like, I was doing this stuff when I was younger. I was, interacting with this stuff when I was younger. But if you had asked me back then, do you think you would be where you are today? I would tell you, I don't think so. Like, in a nutshell, like, I don't think so. So,
But
I
you were
mean, I
already
went to
doing it. Yeah.
and I was already doing it, and I
You
had
were
no
a
idea.
young
So,
citizen scientist already.
yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. Citizen science. Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I went to undergrad and I was pursuing a degree in biology. But I was taking some really hard classes that just wasn't it for me. I was struggling really, really bad. But then I took a wildlife management course in our environmental program. And once I took that course, it sparked my interests a lot. And then so from there, I was talking with the professor who taught that course, and he is an ornithologist, and he did research with birds. So we had this little, like, animal laboratory that had, like, all of our lab animals in there that we use for experiments. So he had his little birds in there, and I had asked him, I was like, oh well, maybe let's see what this is about. And I did that. and I continued to do it until I graduated. And that is sort of how I found how I completed my spark. I'm going to say completed because obviously I had found my spark way back when. I just didn't know it was going to be my spark. So let's just
Right.
say I completed my spark of, finding wildlife biology and birds as my interest. And so from there on, I wanted to further my interest. So I ended up going to NC State and then got my master's, and now I'm here for a PhD. So
What was your
that's my
master's
story
in?
in a
What were you
nutshell.
studying? Was it avian ecology already, or was it?
So my master's was or is in fisheries, wildlife, and conservation biology. But my project was still focused on birds. Yeah.
But was it different birds? You hadn't gotten to this
No,
woodpecker yet,
I
had
didn't.
you?
I was not working with red-cockaded woodpeckers. It was actually going to be northern cardinals, and yeah, and light pollution, noise and light pollution. So I was
Ah,
going to get a little bit more, in depth into that. So I ended up doing something different than what I had started out doing because the pandemic, it's sort of, it put a damper on things, so to speak, considering some of the stuff that we were going to do, but I ended up working. I got to work with the Citizen Science Project Neighborhood Nest Watch. They have a 20 plus year data set that they have this, survival and reproduction data on these 7 different focal species in Washington, D.C., because that's where they're located. And so I took that and I took some data that I had from noise and light pollution of the area of DC where these birds, were found and were surveyed. And I sort of put those two together, and that ended up really being my master's project. So I bounced back, so to speak, with the help of many different people. So and I got through it nonetheless. So here
yeah.
we are.
And were all those bird species, or just
Mhm.
that list? And was any of them the red-cockaded woodpecker? No,
No, none of
not
them were
yet.
red-cockaded.
Okay, that
These were
wasn't
all
even on that
your
list.
yeah, no, these were all your songbirds. So you have like northern
Okay,
cardinals, American robins, Carolina chickadees, wrens. They were, your birds that you would actually see in your
nice.
backyard.
The northern cardinal is the cardinal we see around here.
Yes.
And I love that, I love seeing jays, and it's so unusual to see brightly colored. If you don't live in some exotic tropical place, we're not used to seeing like the bright red male cardinal. Or I
Yeah.
have a pair of bluebirds that's very active in my backyard right now. I put up a bluebird house, but unfortunately,
Yes.
this is another issue, which I know that you work with Karen Cooper across the street. I refer to Karen across the street in almost every episode. She ties to everything, but she um that idea that these you put up a bluebird house. I bought it. It's a
Mhm.
bluebird house. It was sold to me as a bluebird house. I wanted a bluebird house, and
Yes.
sparrows keep moving into it. And I don't mean to sound like speciest or something, but the sparrows are problematic, and those poor beautiful little bluebirds, they need a
Oh
home,
my goodness.
right?
Sparrow said free home.
Yeah. So, did you work on that project involving the eggs?
I
Uh,
did not. It was a potential project, I believe. It was sort of, in its like last, stages here when I came to state. It was a potential project for me, but I ended up really focusing more on the noise and light. But I have heard and still hear many great things that about that project.
are you
So
able to tell me what the idea is there? Do you know about replacing the eggs?
oh,
Oh,
I mean
I know it's not your project, but it
yeah.
involved that, like, going and like where a sparrow has nested and laid eggs, where they
Uh-huh.
would substitute the eggs with fake little wooden eggs,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, which seems a little cruel. It's just a little bit
Science,
cruel.
right?
I know they're a problem, but do you understand like what the idea, why they were doing that? I'm gonna have Karen on and
You
put her under the
'cause I
gun.
would I would hate to tell everybody wrong on this on this live podcast.
Right. Hey, Fred wants to know, and I don't know who he's talking to, but probably you. Can you do any bird calls? Can you do any bird calls?
Oh goodness, no.
Yeah, I certainly can't.
I am not one of those people. I'm impressed with the people that can. I know a ton of people that can, but I myself can no.
So you're
I am
saying you
I am
can
not
become
your
a
person.
scientist even if you can't do bird calls. That
Yeah, for
shouldn't
sure.
stop you.
You should know.
I think Fred probably thought it's like you're a scientist, do some bird calls. Makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. You're part avian.
Goodness, goodness,
Okay,
goodness, goodness.
so well, let's talk about your research. Let's talk about
Sure,
woodpeckers.
sure.
Um, so your research isn't just about this interesting architecture about what they do, but it's an ecological issue, right? So
It is.
tell me what your research is.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, again, I'm looking at climate change impacts on specifically this species' nestling success. So, although this species, their populations are doing fairly well, uh, researchers who have been researching this species for a long time have started to notice these trends in their populations as far as their productivity, their reproduction and productivity are concerned. So therefore, and they feel like it may be something related to climate change. There hasn't been too many studies with climate change in this bird. There's been, maybe one or two out there, but essentially they have linked some specific things, like extreme weather events, so like heavy rainfall, hurricanes, temperatures. They have linked some of those variables to why this bird's productivity may be decreasing a little bit. And essentially what we're trying to get at with my research is that I'm working with this 40-year data set, and within this 40-year data set is three different populations. So we have the Sandhills Game Lands, which is down here in Southern Pines, Richmond County, but near the Southern Pines area. Then we have Eglin Air Force Base, which is on the western panhandle of Florida. And then we have military base Camp Lejeune. So there's three different woodpecker populations on all three of those bases, so to speak. And so this trend that these researchers were seeing was happening in the Eglin population, because we got to think there, which is in the western panhandle of Florida. So you have to think that we have this population of woodpeckers, and they're right along, they're near the coast, they're right along the coastline. So of course they are experiencing these really extreme weather events and other things that could be related to climate change. So essentially what we're trying to see is this sort of, what's going to happen in the future with these other two populations that are in this data set? Because the population in Florida was doing, fairly well for a good bit. And then things started happening, and researchers, thinks that, or some of what they have already seen is some factors related to climate change. Again, we're going to extreme weather, hurricanes, temperature, all that stuff, extreme rainfall. So we're trying to sort of we're trying to get ahead of the game, if you will, to just see if we could potentially identify, anything that, before it happens to these other two populations of woodpeckers.
Well,
So
excuse my ignorance here. Let me just say that, and no follow up necessary. Just excuse my ignorance from here on out.
yes.
Starling says that this is a subject near and dear to her heart.
Oh,
Um,
I
so,
appreciate that, Star. Thank you. It is to mine too. Yes.
um, I don't know. So, does your thesis have to prove something? Like, what does it come down to? Do you have to? Are you trying to prove that there's a connection, or like what's the measure of success for your thesis? What's
Yeah.
the
I mean, so I think one thing is, I think that we as scientists, we sort of, and academics, we sort of think that, well, we're doing all this hardcore research. And so once we complete it, we hope to get something that's sort of like, wow, like this is, mind changing. This is going to change, the rest of, conservation going forward, which, I mean, of course we want that to happen. But essentially what I'm trying to get at is that even if I were to do this project and what I found wasn't, as, big as I'm thinking that,
not as
maybe,
conclusive?
yeah,
Yeah.
they're not as conclusive. There you go. There's still some way for my research to, indeed help conservation of this species as well as other species going forward, I'm sure. I'm in the beginning stages of this research. I'm about to go into my second field season where I will be collecting the additional data that I will be, collecting for this project. But I can, and I really do predict that whatever I do find will help conservation of this species and other species in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And is there a reason why, just have some images of you out in the field?
Yeah.
Is there something about this species that why you would choose this species? Is there something special about it
Yeah.
when you are talking about effects that are probably affecting others too? But so why use this one as the lens?
Yeah. Well, really, it there's many things, but it kind of comes down to we know a ton about this species. This species, we have 40 plus years of high quality data on this species, survival and reproduction. I mean, that's mind blowing. That's amazing. You don't get that with a lot of, a lot of bird species. So, and research on this species have it's gone back all the way into the 1980s and before. Like, this species has been researched a ton, so we know a lot about their habits as far as their ecology goes, different traits about them, and all that we can take into account when we're starting to sort of come up with these research questions. And again, we have this 40 plus year high quality data set that is very well managed, and very well organized. So, there's a lot of questions that you can ask and sort of use this data set for. So, yeah.
And there's something unusual about this woodpecker and the trees that it nests in.
Yeah.
That's different from other birds or different from other woodpeckers even.
Yes.
Tell me about that relation, because once again,
Yeah.
the interconnectivity of things.
There you go. So, I mean, when you think about a woodpecker, most people probably, think that, oh, well, most woodpeckers, they make their nests in dead trees. That's like one common trait for the majority of woodpeckers. Well, not for this species. This species actually makes its nest in living trees. And fun fact, it takes them about a decade to do this. Specifically on my field site, they have documented that it's taken a red-cockaded woodpecker about 13 years to excavate a cavity in a living pine tree. And they specifically favor longleaf pine, but they'll also use other pine species like loblolly. But longleaf pine is the majority of longleaf pine is where you will find an RCW, using longleaf pine the majority of the time.
Woodpecker.
Yeah,
RCW,
red-cockaded woodpecker.
okay.
Yes, so RCW is the acronym that we use, and plus it's so much easier to say, because try to say red-cockaded woodpecker,
10 times.
3 times fast. Yeah, 10 times fast. So,
well, wait a minute though. 13 years. It's like they better not wait till they're pregnant to start building that nest. 13 years before they have a nest built? Like, that's, I compare that to those mourning doves that have nested. I've seen many broods nest on this. And I think mourning doves are sort of well known for being kind of half-assed nest builders. Like, they throw some twigs together and it's like, it's done. We're done. We don't need 13 years. We don't even need 13 minutes. This nest is done.
This is all we need.
Yeah. So 13 years, it's like, who thinks that long term? Humans don't even work that. Like, Apollo missions take that long. We got to the moon in less than 13 years.
We did. And you know what? It kind of all goes back into the history of this species and sort of how we help this species population bounce back. Because with the coupling habitat loss, habitat degradation, and fire suppression, this species numbers dwindled a lot. In the past. So, so again, it all goes back to the management. So, one of my collaborators, Dr. Jeffrey Walters, he's at Virginia Tech. He is the leading expert in this species and the manager of that 40 plus year high quality data set that I keep talking about so much. One of his students actually had the idea to essentially drill an artificial cavity. And I heard him talk about this. When they approached someone with that idea, they really thought that that was the most dumbest idea in their career. They were like, make homes for woodpeckers? Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's, but thinking about way back when their populations were down so low, we see that it takes them about a decade to excavate a cavity. They saw that. So they were like, why don't we help them out? So essentially she did this study where she had about 20 sites, and she drilled cavities in these longleaf pine trees to see if RCWs would inhabit these areas.
Yeah.
And what she got was 19 out of 20 sites became inhabited by RCW. So the idea actually worked. So I'm pretty sure that the person that said that it wouldn't probably had a good laugh way back when, and I would have loved to have seen that.
Well, hold on a second. Now, all of a sudden, I have a lot of questions. For one thing, is there something about the 13 years or 10? Let's say 10 years. So they're not reproducing in that time. Like they do all of. How long does a red-cucated woodpecker live?
You know, that's a good question that I really want to confirm, and I say that because on my field site alone, with the data that I have, I've seen a male red-cockaded woodpecker. Oh, excuse me. I need to start using RCW now.
Yep.
I've seen a male RCW in that data set that lived for about 15 years. So, I mean, so they live a really long time, and it takes them a long time to make their cavity. We have to think that, so these RCWs live in these family groups. So one cool thing about them, they're a cooperative breeder, meaning that they have offspring from past broods who will stick around and help the breeder male and breeder female with their eggs and raise the chicks, find food for the chicks, etc. And another cool thing is that depending on how many family members are in that group, so it's been anywhere in the literature now from 6 family members. Now I've seen about 8 family members. It just keeps increasing. But each one of these family members actually has their own separate tree that they roost in. So, and another fun, well, not so fun fact for my ladies, but I have been told that female RCWs, they get the crappiest tree out of all these groups of trees, and the males get the better tree, especially the breeder male. He gets the best tree.
Yeah. So they nest by themselves. The nest isn't about brooding, like raising babies.
Well, so the breeder male and the breeder female, they have a tree where they have their nestlings, but essentially the rest of the family members, they each nest in a different tree.
Is there something so like a regular other kinds of woodpeckers, they just knock out a nest in much shorter time. Like, do you have any idea? Like,
they do. Well, to be honest, since they use dead trees, probably way shorter than a living tree, and especially with this living pine tree. So, longleaf pine is one of the sappiest pine trees out there. And so when this RCW is trying to excavate this tree, it takes them a while because they have 3 layers that they have to get through. So they have the bark, which that layer is not so bad. But then they have the sapwood layer, and then they have the hardwood layer. So the sapwood layer is where all the sap is. And there have been studies to where way back when RCWs would try to excavate through this layer really quickly, and they get covered with sap, and they would eventually, this sap would basically, kill an RCW. And so, because they would get, so saturated with the sap. So what they figured, over time, they developed this mechanism to where they drill a little bit through that layer. And once the sap starts to flow, they will wait for that sap to dry. So that's why this process takes a little bit. And they keep doing that back and forth until they get through that sap layer. And then you have the hardwood layer, which is about takes much as, same time as the sapwood layer. But a really cool study by one of my colleagues, Michelle Husino, she found that there was a mutualistic relationship between RCWs and fungi spores. So RCWs would take these fungi spores, and as they're drilling, trying to get through this heartwood layer, the fungi spores would essentially eat away at this heartwood layer. And so still took them a little bit, it still takes them a little bit of time to do, but the fungi is sort of helping them out a little bit. And I just thought that was the most coolest thing. Like, that was one of the most coolest things I'd ever heard. It's just, as you see, this species is very very fascinating, and I'm learning something new about them every single day.
I
So
mean, if you take 13 years to dig that hole, I would almost think that it's healing over. Like first I thought, oh, maybe that allows it not to hurt the tree because it happens so gradually. And then I thought,
yeah,
it's like, it's probably healing, it's like, how can you make any progress when you go that
yes,
slow? But
yes.
so if they spend a decade doing that, then what happens? What do they do with the nest? 10 years building this, carving out this cavity. And
Yes.
then
So they will reuse the tree. Don't worry. That work didn't
that's what I'm
they didn't
asking.
do all that work for nothing. They will reuse these trees. Yes.
Um, so that's crazy. And so the
Yes.
longleaf pine, this is also an interesting and important tree here.
It is. It is. It is. So longleaf pine it used to be very abundant in the coastal plain region, and it is found throughout the southeastern United States. Previously, longleaf pine, it was about, so we could find about, 9.4 million acres, somewhere like that, of longleaf pine way back when. Now we're down to about 3.4 million acres of longleaf pine. That's a huge jump. So about 3% of longleaf pine remains currently right now. Yeah. Yeah. And again, going back to three things. So habitat loss, habitat degradation, and fire suppression all contributed to longleaf pine declines in history. And taking all those things into account. So we had settlers. So we had early settlers who would come in. Oh, look at you, kitty.
I'm on a like a tall kind of almost bar stool, and he
Oh
just
my
jumped into my
goodness.
lap. He's out there meowing, and now he's jumped up in my lap. Sorry. And I
love
think
it.
I'm gonna have to let him out, I think, in a second. But
I love it. I love it. I love it.
so we've really devastated. There's some connection. Karen Cooper mentioned to me that the connection between doing research on military. You mentioned that one of these three habitats that you've been studying is a military base, which seems unusual, seems odd, right? And dangerous.
It
That
does.
they're out there, yeah.
It does. It does. And it took way back when. So going back in history. So it's very important with this species to understand the history, and then it sort of helps you sort of see, okay, how we got to where we are today with, management and everything like that. So, but way back when this was proposed, a lot of people were not in favor of it. So you had, different, so the Department of Defense, they were like, say what? Like basically like
What do they
what?
care? Yeah, what are you talking about?
But there's been, as far as like the management of the land goes, there's been a lot of studies that have shown that, military does not impact RCWs at all. It's actually a favor, because the land management that sort of goes into longleaf pine, it kind of helps the military when they go down there to train. But I mean, even today, and I was talking to one of my colleagues when I was actually down at my field site last week. So she works off of Fort Bragg, and they are thinking of putting in another, training base there, a training, base, if you will, in an area that has RCW cavity trees. So it's sort of, I don't know, like hearing that makes you, it really makes you mad. And it sort of takes you back a little bit, not to go off on a tangent, but it sort of takes you back a little bit, because not a lot of people, there's still some people who really don't care about this species due to all of the restrictions that come with this species, and then therefore due to all the restrictions that come with, land management and stuff. So that's sort of how you get into people like private landowners and things like that. You have to take all that into account. So there are still some people out there who are just kind of like, why do we care about these birds? I hear my colleagues say all the time, they'll I'm so sorry if this is not appropriate for this podcast, but
I can already imagine what.
Like they'll have like military men that they're talking to, because on Fort Bragg you have to really do a lot of interaction with the military and check in with people to say, hey, I'm out here doing research. And they have told me that they'll have military guys out there being like, we should just gas all the birds. Like, I don't get it, just gas all the birds. So
they poop on everything.
Yeah, yeah. So it's and it's just stuff like that that you hear, and it's really depressing, and you're just kind of like, okay, dude,
Yeah.
like,
So,
so yeah.
um, I want to ask you about some of this basic woodpecker stuff too. And Regina says, "Wait, is that your cat, Brian, or is it a neighbor's cat?" Regina, it was my neighbor's cat, and now it's my cat. There's a
Oh
story,
goodness.
but it was favoring me. She picked him up as a feral stray, and
Uh,
so that's why I'm saying it's like he started as a completely outdoor cat.
right,
And
right, right,
and yes,
right.
Fred, we know that domestic cats eat a lot of birds. Um but like I said, this was an outdoor cat. Every minute I keep him inside is one bird that's not being terrorized.
Mhm, 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 mhm. There you go.
um
There you go. There you go.
so so let me ask you this thing about like that we've glossed over, but
Yes.
woodpeckers, I kind of imagine like if we ever uplifted animals and they were intelligent, I have this science fiction sort of fantasy that then there would be TV commercials aimed at other animals, and I could see these headache commercials like, "You've been banging on a tree for 13 years. Your head is pounding." um but they clearly must have some sorts of adaptations because most of us
Oh
could
yeah.
not bang our heads like that and survive.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So it all goes back to their anatomy. When I was an undergrad, I took ornithology as an undergrad, and it was probably one of the most coolest things that I had ever learned. Probably one of the coolest things that came out of that class. So we were talking about groups of woodpeckers, and that's when I learned, because someone asked the same question like you did, Brian. Well, do woodpeckers not get a headache when they're sitting there pecking at a tree for forever?
Yeah.
And turns out, believe it or not, woodpeckers have a very, very long tongue. The reason why we don't see this tongue very much, or a very long tongue very much, is because of the fact that a woodpecker's tongue is essentially wrapped around its brain. So it's literally like, from a side view, if you look it up on Google Images or Google, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. Their tongue is wrapped around their brain, and it acts as a cushion. So when they're going ham on this tree, the tongue acts as a cushion to their brain when their head is sort of bouncing back. And I thought that was
Oh.
at first I didn't believe it. At first I thought it was a joke. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah. You didn't just get
what?
that off of Google, did you?
No, I promise you, look it up on Google. You will not go to Google Images. You will not. Well, I mean, if you're
Yeah.
kind of like, well, maybe not go to Google Images, but
Yeah.
if you look it up on Google, I promise you,
and
it
they
is there.
use their tongue also, like the long tongue they
Yeah,
use to get into to do what in the tree?
yeah. Well, so they use their tongue to forage, for one. So they'll use it to get like insects and stuff off of the tree. So fun
You
fact
know,
about woodpeckers.
if you
Yeah.
had even asked me if birds have tongues at all, I guess what? I've never seen a bird's tongue. Well, wait, maybe a parrot's.
True.
But I mean, but just offhand, it's like I just realized it's like, wait a second. It's like we never even see. We see the beak and that's it. And it's like, do birds
That
even
is so
have
true.
tongues?
Now that
You know what I mean? Like, I'll bet am I the only person who hadn't thought about that? Do birds have tongues? I would have had to
you
take a
know
guess and say, I don't know. But but I'm pretty sure like parrots, because with that big mouth, I've seen
Right.
a big fat tongue in a
Right.
parrot's mouth, I believe.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
and
Right.
Corey says, so NFL players need to line their helmets with woodpecker tongue. Good to know. Good to know. We're here to learn and to
Love
educate,
it.
Corey. I don't know why you went right for the woodpecker tongue. Why not stretch it? Like, I don't know. That's a genetic engineering of football players,
It is.
so that their tongue can. So okay, but then is that it? I mean, that's like their helmet.
That's like the baseline. Yep. That's what
Tell me
helps them out
something
the
else
most.
tell me something else weird about or something interesting about your bird, your
Something interesting. Gosh, there's a
RCW.
lot. There's a lot. So, okay. When these birds, when they forage, fun fact, so when they're going around, so the majority of their diet is insects, mainly wood roaches, but they'll eat, spiders and other beetles and things like that. But
Anything
so
that
when they're
eats roaches is a friend of mine. Actually, that sounds weird, but
oh goodness,
we share a common enemy. It's like, you don't have to eat roaches to be my friend. That didn't come out right.
Are you sure that's not what you meant?
I don't think so. I'm just saying
sure?
I'm not a fan.
Are you
so
sure?
thank you.
But
My
yes.
thanks to the Redcucated woodpecker.
Yes. So, and then what they'll do is they will forage. So they will so they essentially get at the insects under the tree bark, so the longleaf pine tree. So they'll chip away at the tree bark to get, under the bark to get the insects. Well, fun fact, female RCWs will only forage on the trunk of the tree. Male RCWs forage on the limbs, on the very higher limbs.
Only on the limbs? Like they only do the limbs and they only do the trunks? Really?
Yep. Pretty.
Is there?
Pretty
yeah.
cool.
So you
Pretty
can tell.
right?
So then you can tell at a glance if it's a male or a female because of where it's pecking.
Basically because of where it's foraging. Yeah. They'll
Foraging,
forage really low. Like females will forage really low. The males will forage really high. So it's.
And when you say foraging, I mean, it takes them 10 or 13 years to build a nest. So what do you mean by foraging? What does that consist of when they're just foraging for
basically
food?
finding food. So finding their food sources, which are mainly those insects. So they will, again, like hook onto the tree, so the longleaf pine tree, and they will chip away at the bark and the insects will be underneath the bark. And that really gets into our point about fire.
Okay. So
and
they
why
do
fire
that.
is so important. Yeah.
But there's some, okay, so they're not, all the pecking isn't about the nest building. There's some pecking that's just foraging right? And so do they must have do they have more interesting feet or claws than some other birds because of the way they need to hang on while they bang on it?
They do. Yep. They do.
Like just what? Yeah, anything you say, just they can hold on better.
Yeah, they can hold on better. They have a good grip.
Okay. Interesting. Yes. And then I cut you off. I think you were going to say something.
What was I going to say?
Foraging.
Goodness. Oh, fire.
That's right. So because of the connection to the insects, what they forage for. So how does that play into the role that fire plays?
We can't forget fire when it comes to RCW. So with the longleaf pine ecosystem, this ecosystem thrives with fire. So prescribed burning. So that's how we get into the whole prescribed burning aspect. So burning does a number of things. It sort of, rejuvenates the ground in a way so that all of these plant species. So the longleaf pine ecosystem is one of the most diverse ecosystems out there. That's why we have all of these different plant species out there, because fire essentially helps them basically grow. So that's one way. Another thing is that fire eliminates ground fuels. So like the pine needles and such, and this sort of reduces, wildfires and things like that. And then fire also helps with parasite management. So ticks, I get a lot of people asking me questions about, do you encounter ticks out, while you're doing your field work? And knock on wood, not yet, because the area that I'm in, it gets burned really, really frequently. So that manages for those ticks.
Let me be clear on that. So, because that's always been very mysterious. Like, how could it be good for the forest to do the burns? But part of it, is that what you just said? That it's that you burn in a way to prevent out of control wildfires. Like it's preemptive. Yeah. Towards preventing out of control wildfires. So that you mentioned the pine, all this extra fuel. Yes. Like if you can clean some of that up, if there was a wildfire. So like, do you do it? You do it in areas that divide. So like that would be where a fire would stop or something.
Yeah. So when we burn, we target areas like on the longleaf pine ecosystem, for example. We target areas that are. So, well, first of all, there's great fire history that, people like, the Wildlife Resources Commission, Forest Service, that they keep up to date. And really, you want to burn an area every, 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 years, given, that range. Because essentially what that does is that, again, it gets rid of, those ground fuels like the pine needles. But for RCWs in particular, it creates this open mid-story. So like my ecosystem, if you see it, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of longleaf pine trees. And at the bottom, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of wiregrass, which is a species of grass that actually thrives with fire. So yeah, like this, right? Yeah, exactly.
That was pretty lucky.
You were very lucky.
It's what I had. It's like this.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the open mid-story, I mean, you see how you could literally just walk through it without any problems. This is what RCWs favor, is this open mid-story, because that fire essentially gets rid of all of those mid-story hardwoods. So one example is turkey oak. So turkey oak is a species of hardwood, and if not burned, frequently, turkey oak can get really, really high. So if not, if we don't burn it within that 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 year range, it can get pretty, pretty high. And so with that, it doesn't create that, it doesn't create that open mid-story that we like, unless we burn, turkey oaks, and then we get that. Also, we want to burn hardwoods and stuff like that, especially turkey oak, because it's a great way for predators like black rat snakes. So black rat snakes is one of the RCW's top predators. They'll use, hardwoods like these to sort of help them climb up the cavity tree. But another cool thing about RCWs, not to get off of fire, but this leads me sort of into this. Another cool thing about RCWs and the reasons why they like living trees is that, again, the longleaf pine is the sappiest pine tree, which means it flows with sap. So once the RCWs construct their cavity, they'll make these resin wells, like little holes within the tree, which then flow with sap. And this is actually a defense mechanism. So when predators like black rat snakes try to climb, they get covered with sap, fall to the ground, and are literally, slithering off the whole day covered with sap. So
yeah,
very, very smart birds.
Wow. So how long have you been working on this project, and how much longer will you be working on it?
Goodness. So I have been working on this project for almost a year now. Last year was my first year out in the field. So that year I was sort of focusing on learning about the management and helping with the monitoring, just seeing what all goes into managing this federally endangered species. And I mean, it's a lot. It is a lot, but it is very, very rewarding work at the end of the day.
Why don't tell me that? Why is it? Tell me what you love about doing this, and why is it? Why did you just say that? Why is it rewarding? What do you enjoy about your work?
Well, so what I love about doing it is that really, it's really cool. Like, it's just really cool work that I get to do. When I sit here and tell people that, well, hey, I'm working with this woodpecker, and in order for me to, let's say, ban the chicks, I have to climb trees. And people are like, what? Climb trees? Like, what are you talking about? Climb trees? Like, what do you mean? To get to the cavity. Yes, like that. To get to the cap. Look, you were lucky again. There you go. To get to
that
the
one
cavity.
Wasn't luck. That one was very. Almost. That's how good I am. Yeah.
So to get to the cavity, in order to get these chicks and ban them, we have to climb trees, like you see me doing in this picture. And then we have the chicks there. So I have like 3 little chicks, in the cup of my hand. And those are.
Look at those little dinosaurs.
They are literally literal dinosaurs.
How many? That's 2, right? I see 2 heads.
That is 2. And then you'll see on their legs there that we have the color bands. So that's what we use to ban them. That's what we use to identify them, so that when we go back out and do what we call fledge checks, that's essentially what we use to see. We recite these birds. We have to go back out and recite these birds once they fledged the nest, once they fledged their cavity. And we use those color bands to make sure that, to account, make sure that all the individuals are accounted for.
Like, you spot them from a distance, or you have to catch them?
Yo, spot them from a distance. So a high-powered spotting scope is
Yeah.
is the major tool here. So I use a high-powered spotting scope, and I actually use it on funny story, not to go off on a side tangent, but
Is
I use
this
mine
is
on
this an
a
example of or maybe that's not as high power?
well, those might be high-powered binoculars and a
Okay.
high-powered camera. But yeah, well, okay. If you go back to that, yeah, right there. So, which is it's far away picture, but here you see I'm leaning up against a tree, and I'm actually using the high powered spotting scope to kind of scope out the cavity, which you see the tree there, sort of in the middle, that has the two white lines. So that's how we sort of know what tree is an RCW cavity tree. So all the trees that are on my study site are marked with those two white lines, and that sort of helps. That just makes you, helps you be aware. So we have a lot of, military that come out there to train. We have prescribed burnings that are going on. So it's just a way to note that, hey, this is an RCW cavity tree, FYI.
But I mean, from a distance, if you spot a yellow, I mean, there's only so many colors. How do you?
Yeah.
I thought that a
So
lot of times when you catch them, there might be a number, but you'd have to catch them to read the number, right?
yes. So with each of the family groups, they have a specific band combo, a specific color combo that we use. And so we make sure to note that. We have a whole list of, like, the combos that we use. And so we make sure to note that when we go out to band them. We note that in our notebook. Then when we go out to do fledge checks, we know what color bands we're looking for.
Okay.
And so that's the system there. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yes.
So, the time is already flying by, and we had a
It
list of
is.
things that
Gosh,
we
we've been
could
having
talk
so much
about.
fun talking about
Yeah.
RCWs and everything else, haven't we?
Um, yeah, and I probably have more just woodpecker questions, but
Of course.
I know that at NC State, you're in the Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources, and you're
I
also
am.
part of this big public science cluster that I know
Mhm.
Karen Cooper and Katie Mack.
Yes.
It's not limited to biologists.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Um, and so in this public science cluster that was just really created a few years ago at NC State, the idea is that everyone there is like they're researchers, but they're also expected to engage with the public. There's a science communication part of
Yes.
your job.
Yes.
So is
Yes.
science communication important to you and enjoyable to you?
Yes, for sure. Well, funny story, Brian, and I'm glad that you asked me this question. I actually found the importance of science communication when I came to state and when I learned a little bit more about the public science cluster. When I first came to state, I was sort of, I was hearing more about the idea and public science and science communication, and I was sort of like, why is this important? Like literally just being real and raw here. I was like, why is this important and why should I care? I've just come to do my research. Like that's it.
Right.
I have just, come to do my research. I came here to do my research. But as the years went on, and actually I found that importance, believe it or not. I know that the pandemic has been hard on a lot of us. So I don't mean to say this in a good way, but I actually found my passion of science communication through the pandemic. So us being, shut up, in our houses for so long, I actually the first thing I did was I started this blog. It was just my blog. It was just, just a blog. It wasn't anything special. But from that blog, I sort of started to interact with people who were actually finding that stuff on the internet, and they would reach out to me and ask me questions. And I was like, my goodness, like, wow. But then it actually came after that, came Black Birders Week. So for people who aren't aware of Black Birders Week, it started with that incident with, Christian Cooper in Central Park and Anna Karen. Anna Karen.
Yeah, could you elaborate
not
just a little bit that
yeah. Yeah.
a
So
woman thought
basically
just because a guy was out looking at
yeah,
birds with camera and binoculars or
yeah,
something that she thought
yeah.
he was suspicious or something?
Yeah. So basically Christian Cooper was a black man who was out in the park minding his own business. And she thought that it was suspicious that he was out here in this park just doing what birders do. And so that incident that's sort of how we got Black Birders Week. So a ton of people that I know and I've met through Black Birders Week now, so we're really good friends. They put together this whole week of just basically not only recognizing that, that event that happened, but also it was a way for minorities and for people of color in the field of not only wildlife biology, but any sort of, natural science field to sort of put themselves out there and say, hey, this is what I do as a researcher. And it was sort of a way to showcase, and it allowed other minorities and people of color to see on social media and everything. So there was a whole hashtag that went viral. Different outlets like Audubon Society, picked it up. It was, getting picked up everywhere. And it was sort of this way for us to see that there were more people like us participating in birding,
participating
stuff
in suspicious activity.
And suspicious activity. There you go. And doing stuff, in wildlife and conservation. And so from there, I was actually getting interview requests from people from different outlets, just asking me to sort of talk about my story and, my experience with, these sorts of things. And that's sort of another thing that helped me realize that, oh, okay, well, this is a form of science communication. I can see how this would be beneficial. And then from there, that's sort of how my media presence grew. So most of my research and my science communication, I take to my Instagram and my Twitter. That's mainly what that's for. And that's sort of how my social media presence just began to grow, and more people were interested in knowing about what I did as a scientist. And not only that, I found my passion for, writing stories and telling stories about all these different topics, not just about birds, but about climate change, about other species of wildlife. And from there, that's sort of how it all started. And then I started giving, I've written articles for many outlets and contributed to many articles. National Geographic is one, eBird is another, Wired Magazine was actually the first outlet, the first media outlet to ever contact me about, hey, do you want to be featured in a story? And I was like, whoa. I was like, Wired Magazine. I was like, whoa, I got lucky there. But it was just like from there, I had that. I do podcasts, like I'm doing this with you right now. And I do, presentations to different organizations and people who invite me to come out and talk about different areas. When I was a master's student, it was mostly about my work with noise and light pollution. Now it's about my work with RCW. So I started to learn and gain real appreciation for why science communication is really, really important. So that's really in a nutshell how I got into science communication and began to appreciate it more.
What I had up there, that's both that at LD Pharr is both your Twitter and Instagram handle.
It is.
And I'm guessing that will also lead someone to your blog.
If
you start there.
It'll lead them to my website where my blog once existed, but I sort of have that. I kind of have. You might find stuff out there, but I've sort of gotten away from that because now I'm doing other things. I
pulled up one other image, but apparently I didn't stick it into the PDF because you have a cover story out in a magazine that you just posted today, like a new story.
Oh, I do. Yes.
And I got the image, but apparently it's not in the PDF. So, what magazine was it?
Yeah. So one of my science communication roles, one of my main roles is I am a science communication intern with North Carolina Sea Grant. So I love this role for a few reasons. One, I get to I'm exposed to different things that aren't about my niche, my area of expertise. I'm talking about, anything from the ocean, aquaculture, the blue economy, so, and diversifying yourself as a scientist, I think is a really great thing to do. So, still have your area of study and, what you focus on, but it's also great to know about other things. So, but anyways, this story, they featured it on the front cover of their award-winning magazine, Coastwatch, and it is about the impacts of climate change on birds of North Carolina. So I sought out about 3 different people who not only had ties to North Carolina Sea Grant, but some had ties to NC State. Some, they're at the University of Wilmington, and and myself. So I featured myself also. But just talking about this really cool work that we get to do as young scientists with our feathered friends and understanding climate change. So I've been getting some really great, like it's been getting some really great attention, and I absolutely love that.
Excellent.
Yeah. So and it was funny because usually I wait to broadcast things. So I've written about maybe 4 different articles for North Carolina Sea Grant, but and we run social media posts on them. So usually I wait until they run the social media posts on it, and then I'll start advertising. But somehow people found this story before we even advertised it, and I was like, wow. I was like, this is great. Like, it was great nonetheless.
Well, let me ask you, back on the topic of black birders.
Yeah.
Did you has this been, have you, especially before that specifically became an issue that was so relevant to you because you're a birder and you're black, but did you previously, how much was that an issue to you? Did you think of yourself as a black scientist or just a scientist? Did you think of yourself as a woman in science or just a scientist?
Yeah.
Are there, issues unique to being those people that were relevant along your path?
Well, that's a good question. So, and this is honesty hour, so I'm just going to be honest here. So when I was in undergrad, so I went to Wingate University. It's a small liberal arts college, like a small graduating class. Just everybody knew everybody. Really, the topics of diversity and science, being, we need more diversity in science. It really did not come up during my undergrad, years. And so I was a little bit, I didn't really think about it as much. It did not come across in my mind, that there was anything, wrong, or at least, it wasn't at the forefront of my mind. Like, of course, I sort of knew.
Was the situation diverse, or was there a lack of diversity?
Yeah,
there was a lack of diversity.
Yeah, it was just, like the topic was never touched on. It was never talked about really that much. It wasn't until I got to NC State that it sort of started to come to the forefront of my mind that, like it's, coming to, a very predominantly white institution for one, like predominantly white. And then being in this program, I am one of the few black people in my whole fisheries and wildlife program. So that's when it really sort of starts to hit, when you're sort of looking around and you're like, oh, like, wow, okay. And then, it being NC State, I started then, being exposed to all of these issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, we're trying to work towards, our college is trying to work towards becoming more diverse. Our program is trying to work towards becoming more diverse. And I sort of think, with time too, diversity sort of became a very heavy issue that a lot of, schools and other individuals began to focus on. So in all honesty, it wasn't until I came to NC State that I was really, really, really hit with the issues of diversity in, in the field. I mean, not only just in the field of wildlife biology, but in STEM in general. And so with that, I've sort of found myself, becoming an advocate and a role model for minorities and people of color who are, in programs like mine. Because so I try to find any way that I can through, my work, my science communication, to sort of broadcast what I do as a black scientist, and not only as a black scientist, but a black, woman in this field of wildlife biology that you really do not see that much.
Did you have, coming up earlier, did you have role models, and did you have any role models that were black scientists or female scientists or black female scientists?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So from my elementary school years, I only had one, and she was a teacher assistant. So I had one black teacher assistant throughout my whole elementary school years. Middle and high school, it was few far in between as well. Undergrad was probably the most that I've had of having black role model, and black women scientists. So we had about 2 we have about 2 Black women scientists who were in our biology program there at Wingate, and I really leaned on them, a lot for myself and getting through my program. Not speaking from like a diversity standpoint, but just like a mental standpoint of just because again I had those hardships before I really found wildlife biology as my passion. So I was leaning on a lot of people, and those were 2 of the main people that I leaned on
Yeah.
there when I was at Wingate. Yes. But now here at State, now that you bring that up, we have one professor, we have one Black professor that's in forestry, and she does forestry things. But other than that, we have really great black role models. Our dean here at our college of natural resources, so but there's still few far in between. Our diversity really needs help.
Right.
Here.
But maybe fortunately your community extends beyond your own university.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so you are part of a
Yes.
community.
Yes. For sure.
Lauren, I think we got to wrap up, but I did want to, but I did ask you if you had a favorite bird, and
You did,
it's not a woodpecker. In fact, let me see. Oh, there it goes. So, but let us take another. There's another look at your little baby.
Yes.
There you
I
are,
mean,
holding a couple.
RCWs, they are one of my favorites, but I feel like if I were to say that, people would be like, "Well, you work with them, so that's why they're your favorite."
But you said that this is your favorite bird.
Yes.
Now, introduce us. We haven't been formally introduced.
Yeah, so this is the eastern phoebe. It is a species of flycatcher. And so I tell people who really know this bird when they ask me, "What's your favorite bird?" and I say the eastern phoebe. Some people will take it, and some people will look at me sideways, and they're like, "Why?" Because
why?
and I feel, and well, for one, I feel that they asked that because this bird has a special call. So it's one of the birds that actually says its name, that you can realize who it is in the wild.
Really?
So it goes Phoebe. So it literally says its name, so you know that it's an eastern phoebe. But it's a literal alarm clock. Like in the mornings, if you hear it, it will wake you up with no problems. So I usually get that from people when I say, "Oh, I like the eastern phoebe," and they're like, "Well, you must like noise." Like I don't like, but
I can't tell, but from these pictures, it looks like kind of a small bird. All 3 of these look like kind of small, and I'd never heard of the eastern phoebe.
Yeah, it's one species that actually it's one of those species where when spring comes along, you start to hear them. So it's one of those birds that really emerges when spring comes along, and you know that it's spring.
What else? So what makes it your favorite? I mean, there's so many incredible birds for so many reasons. Whether parrots, you know what I love asking Lindsay Zano, paleontologist over at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences.
Yes.
I don't know if this has changed, but a few years ago, if you asked her favorite dinosaur, she'd say it was a living dinosaur, a secretary bird, which is, I didn't know to prepare an image of that. They're these incredible long legs. They kill snakes with their claws, and they have great head feathers. Look up secretary bird. They're insane looking, and if you find video, you can watch them in action. So, and then you have cardinals and parrots and hummingbirds.
Yeah.
What is it? What raises the little Phoebe to be your favorite?
Yeah. Well, honestly, my answer is probably going to be so lame, but when they're perched like that, and they fluff out their little body feathers, and they just look so fat, like. When they're grooming themselves, when they're preening themselves, I think they are just the most cutest things in the world. And then not only that, but they also have this little tail bob that they do when they're perched.
Yeah. I think so, like a funny little behavior.
Thing.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's the most
cute.
Cutest thing.
I'm really liking these. I knew they were around, but these bluebirds, I never see them. But just lately, the past few weeks, I've been seeing a pair in my backyard, and then I had to Google to find out that, like the cardinal, it's the male that's more brightly colored. And I watched a couple days ago, there's the bluebird house, and a few feet away is the fence around my backyard.
Yeah.
And I watched this male chase a squirrel. The squirrel was scrambling along the top of the fence, and the bird was flying after it like this, coming after it. And it was like such a flash of it was so blue. I was like, oh wow, I don't usually see that much blue. And then I discovered that okay, it's the male that has more blue, and the female was bringing like a stick or something into the house, and he was standing guard, and he chased away sparrows, and he chased away squirrels several times. But the best was watching that squirrel scramble in fear along the. I don't know what the bluebird could have done to it, but it was great behavior to just see. I just look out the window, and that was the first thing I saw was, oh my God, I wish I had video of that.
Oh my goodness. Say, watch out, Animal Planet. There you go.
So Lauren, this has been great. I want to remind everyone that you're not Brian Malow, but that they can find you on Twitter or on Instagram at LD Pharr, Pharr.
Yes, that is me.
Is there anything else that you want people to know? Do you want them to know something about your woodpecker or prescribed burning or conservation?
You know what, Brian? I think our conversation was so thorough. And I really do, but in a good way. I really do feel like we hit on all of these really great points. And they sort of intertwined, like they were like we sort of told a story a little bit. Like we didn't go off on a tangent as what we thought we would. We didn't go all over the place.
Not on too many. No. Maybe just a few tangents.
Yeah, just a few. But I mean, honestly, like I said, I think this conversation has been so thorough, and I hoped, your viewers may have learned a thing or two that they may not have known about RCWs in general. Maybe they didn't even know what an RCW, was. I know I didn't. I mean, I'm an avian ecologist, and I had no idea. When I was approached with this project, I was like, what is a redcucated woodpecker? I was like, what is this?
I know. I never heard of it. You mean the other, because there's the red, is it the red pileated woodpecker?
Yeah, the pileated woodpecker. Yes. Yeah. So that's like the really,
that one
really
we see around woodpecker. Here a lot.
Yes.
And I hear them sometimes. Well, Lauren, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll talk again. Don't go away. I'm just going to say goodbye. And thank you very much. This was very entertaining.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
So, Lauren can be found at LD Pharr on Instagram and Twitter. And that is our show. I'm going to Blacksburg, Virginia to do a couple little shows tomorrow and the next day. So no live shows for a couple days, but we'll be back with more. Some great shows coming up. The theme music is by Logan Whitehurst. Find him at loganwhitehurst.com. And also look for his Spotify page, his Spotify artist page. And that's it. So thank you, and we'll see you again soon.